I remember one particular day, I was probably the last person or one of the last people in the office. It was probably around like 8 p.m. I was working away on these proofing edits, and one of our C-suite leaders, executives, was about to leave the office, and he was like kind of walking by me. I was sitting in the bullpen, just like working away on my laptop. When he saw me sitting there, still working on these proofing edits, he stopped just to be like, "Hey, like, why aren't you heading home?" and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, "Oh, I'm just trying to get these edits done, and I'll head home soon." And he actually stopped, like put his stuff down and sat next to me. And I'm like a junior art director at this point, right? And this is like one of our C-suite executives. And he's like, "What can I do to help?" And I'm like, "Not a whole lot. I've got a stack of 300 pages here that I've got to type in individually into InDesign. I don't think there's anything you can really do here." And he just sat there with me for an hour or two and just like kept me company, talked to me, just like literally held the stack of papers for me and just handed it to me one at a time while I was working through proofing edits. And that made such a huge impact on me. I'm sure that individual probably doesn't remember this story at all, but just that hour or two that he spent there as like a key leader of the business, sitting there with a junior art director, just making stupid proofing edits, was just like so powerfully impacting to me.
Hello and welcome to Best Story Wins. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jason. And today our guest is Andrew Chen of Hive. Hey, Andrew. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah, man. So for those that might not be familiar with Hive, can you give us a quick overview of what Hive is, what y'all do, and then also can you provide a brief overview of what you focus on in your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. Hive is a fintech that builds a secondary marketplace for private company stock. My team focuses on overseeing the brand design and creative for marketing, as well as just brand overall at the company. And pretty new to the role, just about 2 months in. But when this comes out, probably a little bit longer. But yeah, right now it's about 140 employees. So we're a fast growing company and hoping to continue to build out the team.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so you've had fascinating path, gone from freelancing, worked at cool brands like Instacart, and now you're in a role leading creative at Hive. What's the chapter in that overall journey that you feel like really shaped you the most?
Yeah, I think I'd really take it back to the beginning. I mean, I kind of had an unusual start to my design career, although it's probably similar to a lot of other folks out there. I really stumbled into design through the music scene and skateboarding. I grew up in Southern California in the Los Angeles area, and I really picked up graphic design as a way to contribute to the scene I was a part of, whether that was making T-shirts or um, posters, tour materials, things like that. I think one of my first freelance projects, quote unquote, would have been a skate deck that I designed for a local skate shop, and so it was really kind of an interesting way to enter the industry because I didn't really learn anything the proper way, if that makes sense. Like I didn't go to design school or understand all the fundamentals, just kind of figuring things out as it went. But the brilliance of that, I think, was I was working on client work from day one, essentially, right? So like whether that was making Zanga or like live journal banners for bands out there, or eventually MySpace layouts and random things. It was just kind of a way to learn on the fly. It was doing client work really from day one, and because of that, I was learning right away how to understand what a client's looking for, or be able to build something out, figure out new ways to do things. I remember for a little while I was helping out a local screen printer with separations art for t-shirts, t-shirt printing, and I had no idea what I was doing, just figuring out how to, turn gradients into halftones so that they print properly on a t-shirt. And it was just such an interesting time to just I loved it. I mean, it was really what made me fall in love with design as a practice, because there were no real rules. I was just kind of making it up as I went. And that's really what I loved about it, right? Like I think if maybe if I had entered it through a different path, it would have been like a little bit less compelling to me, or a little bit less interesting. But I would do that for fun. And I had no idea you could make it a real career, right? Like at the time, it was just something I was doing because I really loved it. And in the music scene, for me, a lot of, if you weren't in a band because you couldn't play an instrument, maybe you were starting a label or being a promoter or doing something like that. A lot of kids like me just ended up starting clothing companies because that was like the next best thing you could do if you weren't like directly involved with the music. And so that's what I ended up doing, um, printing T-shirts and selling them out of the trunk of my car at shows, or trying to get bands to wear them on stage. And uh, that to me is like still some of my favorite memories and super formative stuff to my career. Like I really consider that kind of like my equivalent of design school, was just kind of growing up in that scene. So I think that really still shapes me today. And sometimes when I get kind of caught up in what corporate design and branding, uh, and what this industry might might have going on, I kind of reconnect to those days as something that reminds me, why I keep doing what I do.
Curious, what was your clothing brand called? And also, where in LA did you grow up?
Yeah, I had a few clothing brands over these, probably 6 or 7, but the first one I started, gosh, this would have been what, like 2003, 2004, was a brand called Endeavor. It was spelled Endever, great, classic misspelling, but that was in. So I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and then spent some time in the Santa Clarita Valley as well. They used to do local shows at the sports complex in Canyon Country in the Santa Clarita Valley. So yeah, I used to sell T-shirts out of there. Eventually, I started another clothing company called Fight Clothing. Went out on the road with a few bands, and stuff like that over the years. And that was pretty fun. Just kind of involved in the hardcore scene. Traveling around, sleeping in Walmart parking lots, and eating Slim Jims, and just going out on the road at really hot venues. American Legion halls, and random basements, and it was a blast. And so that was another one I started probably for the longest time. And then yeah, I've had a few other small ventures here and there over the years. But yeah.
Mostly screamcore bands.
Yeah, a lot of, punk, metal, and hardcore, the heavy stuff. It was I used to joke with my friends, it's like the more inaccessible it was, like the more we liked it. That was kind of the vibe. Like the worse produced it was, the cooler it was.
Yeah, they're like put them down in the basement for that show.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't believe we've never talked about this before, but I grew up in Simi Valley, and so I skated skate lab a ton growing up. So maybe we cross paths, 20 years ago or so.
Southern California is massive, and so I mean there were so many little scenes just around both like skateboarding and just music and some of the different venues. I mean, I think about going to like down in Hollywood, Henry Fonda Theater, or Chain Reaction, or like some of these different places where, I mean, there's such a thriving like music and skate scene down in Southern California in those days.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we could talk about skating and growing up in Southern California probably for hours, but in terms of design, like you were at Instacart for a long time, I know, and pretty integral to a lot of things going on there. And I know you were involved in, the evolution of the brand. And curious now, as the guy that's kind of leading creative and brand at Hive, like how do you, and maybe call out a specific example if one comes to mind, but like how do you approach pitching bold creative, and what have you learned works and what doesn't when it comes to like getting buy-in for those ideas for people that maybe aren't designers themselves?
So this is going to be a kind of a funny answer because it's not, I think, super design oriented, and probably not what you would expect. But I think fundamentally, like, we forget that we're in a human business sometimes as creatives. And the reality is when you're trying to get work bought in, like, you can come with all the evidence and all the, show all the process, or whatever it might be, like come with like a great quote unquote research report. But at the end of the day, there's a client or a stakeholder at the other end that is a person making a decision based off of ultimately how they feel, you know? And I think sometimes what we forget is that you need to build a strong human connection in order to get these ideas bought in. Like, you could, if you come with something bold and you have no relational equity with that person you're trying to sell into, like, you're going to have a hard time getting a yes. And so, it's easier in some cases than others to build that common ground. Obviously, if you work closely with whoever that decision maker is and you have the ability to, spend time with them, get to know them as a person, even understand their likes, dislikes, or their family, environment, or whatever it might be. But like, it's just those simple things of like the same way in my mind, that you get to know a person and become friends or build a relationship with them. That's the same way you get great work bought in. That's the reality of it. Like that's I think the secret behind everything else is that if you build those connections, those friendships, that common ground, you can actually get those risky ideas sold in because they might understand where you're coming from, with that idea. And the same thing is true of whatever team is kind of working around that pitch. Like the more context that they have for who you are as a person, why you've made these decisions, why you're recommending it, what the story is, that's what sells it in. And if you can connect people to story and that narrative of what it is that's kind of creating this idea that it doesn't kind of exist in a vacuum, but what are you trying to connect everybody to? I think that's how you get great ideas bought in, honestly. So, whether that's trying to pitch a logo change to a CEO, or that's trying to get a client to, understand your vision for brand strategy. If you get to know them as individuals, as people, it makes your job so much easier as a creative.
Do you remember a moment or the first time when you transitioned a bit from this feeling of like, okay, I'm designing this to, okay, now I'm thinking like a creative leader? And what was the change there, and what, new skills did you have to develop to go from kind of that individual practitioner, master of your craft, to like the the rest of the process of being a creative leader?
Yeah, I don't know if I can identify necessarily like a point in time where I felt that transformation. But I think it's definitely been this kind of evolutionary process of kind of recognizing more of the role of being a creative as an interpreter, more than just self-expression, but kind of embracing that role of being an interpreter. And what I mean by that is I really feel that whether it's client work or you're in-house, or even if you're, just doing it for fun, like building your own brand, your own company, what you're really trying to do is take an idea that exists right in someone's head, and you're trying to bring that to life somehow. It's almost alchemy, right? And I feel like as creatives and designers, whether you're in a leadership position or actually doing, so much of your work is kind of developing this shared language between people. And I think it's really magical, and it's really interesting, but it's something I feel like we can forget sometimes when we're just in the act of doing and just churning stuff out. It can be very, I think, routine in some ways, and you kind of go through that suffering, like as a creative, of trying to figure out like how do I get this idea across. But what I found is that over time, I'm spending more time trying to understand the originator of whatever that idea is, or what they're trying to get across. So, at earlier days, I might just get a brief, and maybe it's one sentence long, and it's just, I need this deliverable, or I need this thing, and maybe the medium and all of that, the channel's already prescribed. I spend a lot more time these days trying to get to know what the requester or whatever the stakeholder is trying to actually accomplish or achieve, and where it all comes from. What, especially in a complex organization, I think when things are fast moving, some of that gets lost. But I think the more that you can kind of connect that, like context and purpose is what I call it. Like if you can understand the context of what's being asked and then connect that to purpose, like I think that's our job as creatives. And I think I've been connecting to that a lot more over the years, versus just expressing and doing, but actually building a real bridge as like a communicator, and building that kind of form of interpretation between what's trying to be accomplished and then like the output. So I'd say that's the big thing for me.
So, what have you learned about growing as a person while also growing as a creative? What's been hard about that, and what's been really worth it for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, these things are one in the same. Growth as a creative, and growth as a person. Early on in my career, I developed this framework for thinking that I still carry to this day, which is I want to succeed by helping others succeed, and not operating always in this like zero sum game mentality where, someone's got to lose in order for me to win. I think in any field, but even in creative and design, it can be quite competitive, right? I think there's this just you're only as good as your last idea, and kind of all these concepts I think can kind of take away some of the joy of what it means to be around people and to be helpful and to be helping others succeed. So whether it's work for a client in my role as a manager or as a direct report or as just a cross-functional partner, I try to take that mentality into everything. I want to succeed by helping someone else succeed. And what's that win-win situation that we can find for all of us? You know, for me, being like a quote unquote great designer will always be second to being a good person, which to me means how you show up for your family, your friends, your coworkers, your community, whatever that might be. I think that needs to kind of come first place and everything else flows out of that. So that's how I hold myself. That's kind of my principle. And that's ultimately what I believe. It's if you can be a better person, you will be a better creative ultimately.
Yeah, that's really cool. What about in terms of how you relate to work itself? Like, how is your definition of, say, great work? How has that changed over the years, and what does great mean to you now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about what I said earlier, context and purpose. I think in general, what has evolved for me is not painting everything in such broad strokes when it comes to like defining greatness or like, what's great work. When I think about it, if you look outside of the category of creative and design, what defines a great meal as an example, right? So much of that depends on like the who, the what, when, where of both like the diner and the cook, right? So to me, design and advertising functions much of the same way. You have to think about the context of like who's making, who's it being made for, what are all those things like, and the confluence of all of that stuff, like the appropriate context for what's being created, what's the message and the story behind what's being produced. So to me, great work happens when the context and purpose click to create something distinct and memorable with like that intended audience. It's hitting that like right place, right time, kind of all those different components. I think that's when it's the work really sings. So when I define greatness by matching context and purpose in a really resonant way.
How has your creative process evolved over the years? Starting out as a freelance designer working in the music scene, and now leading brand and creative. Like, how has that changed, and how does it now also address needing to not just focus on your own work, but that of a team?
Yeah, awesome question. Freelance, whether it's freelancing in music or elsewhere. I mean, I think a fun story for us, like we go way back, you and me, Josh, right? Because I freelanced for Column 5, like way back in the day, doing some design work, and I think one of the biggest shifts that I've seen over time for myself is just slowing down. I think a bit more and spending more time on the upfront. Like I think even when I was, freelancing for Column 5 back in the day, I would receive a brief and I'd start executing right away. Right, I'd jump right into design based on whatever limited information I have. Sometimes you get a lot of information, sometimes you don't have a whole lot, and I think it's easy to just jump right in, especially when deadlines are really tight. Which sometimes you have to do that, but whenever the opportunity presents itself, I really like to actually spend the time refining and improving the brief when possible, even if it's not part of the ask. And what that often looks like is just spending time with the requester, the stakeholder, whoever it might be that's kind of produced that first iteration of the brief, and just talking through it to get a better understanding of what's going on. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Who is this for? So many times us designers receive a brief that has everything super laid out. This is where it's going to live. These are the sizes. This is how many it's going to be. These are the constraints. And I kind of like the yes and approach a lot of times in creation where you can kind of commit to doing what's been kind of required or asked of you. But I really love spending the time to actually talk through what the project is and seeing if there's any magic that comes out of that conversation. Because I've found at times that, a channel might already be prescribed, but there could be an idea that forms from not just like the visual concept, but that could actually impact, how it shows up in the world. Where do you actually place this? Like maybe this was prescribed to you as an out of home campaign, but you might find in talking with the marketer or the stakeholder, whoever it might be, this would actually be a great PR stunt, or this would be a great live activation, actually, or this, hey, there could actually be a cool, video series out of that. That maybe that person who put the brief together in the first place, they may not have thought of that. To me, the magic comes from just being in the room with someone and talking through some of those things to almost rebrief at times. I think that's something that I try to take as much time on as possible when we have the luxury for that, to just talk it through, sometimes rebuild it from the studs, and then sometimes it's a matter of just putting something out there that's been asked for, and then saying, hey, what about this, if we had more time or more budget, maybe this is something we could do.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, the yes and approach is something that we started adopting, not just across design, but kind of as an organization a couple of years ago. And I remember it being really just a useful device in especially tricky conversations, or in ones where you needed to introduce some nuance. It's so funny. We were just having a chat yesterday, and it's like, one of our partners was she was talking, and she was like, there was some disagreement and some tension in there. She's like, yes. And we all just kind of started laughing. And it was just kind of a cool moment where it's like, you can disagree without being super disagreeable. And so I don't know, that's kind of my take on it. And it's cool to hear you talk, because yeah, I think, even non-designers can relate to that mentality of like, okay, I'm just going to dig in, I'm going to get super tactical. But yeah, if you take the measure twice, cut once approach, to your creative work, it could be so useful. And I think it's a cool perspective on life in general too, not just design, but how you approach anything, so love to hear how your thinking has evolved there.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially too when it comes to, so many people out there are kind of running their agency, or as a freelancer or whatever it might be. Like you do so much client work that so much of the time is just fast turnarounds and stuff you got to get done. And something I always encourage designers that I work with to do is it's okay to go ahead and just execute exactly what's asked for, and that's like absolutely fine. Um, just go ahead and suggest what you think might be in your mind, a better idea. Go for it. But just make sure you get the actual job done first, you know what I mean? So that they don't get annoyed with, you not following instruction. And I think that combination of being able to kind of satisfy the minimum ask, but then also see what you can do to up level, that's just such a great way to just kind of bring your thinking, forward. And I think for young designers, that's a smart thing to kind of bring to the table as well. I do some mentorship on ADP List and talk with different young designers, and a lot of times something I'll hear is like, well, I'm not getting the opportunity to do creative work, or I'm like not really, I'm in a very locked in brand style, or I'm only doing production design, or I'm only doing XYZ. And I'm like, that's fine. We all need to operate and kind of whatever's asked of us, and we're kind of in that lane a lot of times. But if you can, take the opportunity to go ahead and just pitch, and even if it's going to fail, um, do what's asked of you, pitch something new, see what happens. Worst case scenario, they say no, but sometimes that's where great creative work can come out of, and that also showcases your thinking, as a creative and a designer that can actually evolve and up level what's happening. What is it like? You miss all those shots that you don't take. So.
And speaking of younger designers, one of the things that we were chatting about a couple weeks back, was your desire to and commitment to sharing your experience with and guiding younger creatives. Why is that important to you, and what makes you want to give back, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, as I alluded to kind of earlier, a lot of it just has to do with the way I started my career. Because I didn't go to traditional design school, I experienced a ton of imposter syndrome. I wasn't sure if I was even qualified to do this as a profession, because I was like, well, I mean, I didn't go to a fancy art school. I was, I don't even know if I'm using Photoshop correctly. That was kind of like what I used to always joke and say. I'm like, I don't know if I'm doing this quite right, but here it is. And it was really the people that took a chance on me, and whether that was just through encouragement and just, a kindness, like whether it was people in the industry I looked up to or just friends and even family members at different times, just being able to come alongside and just kind of give you that boost you needed to just be like, okay, I think I might be on the right path. Those little conversations and those pieces of like impact, like they just impacted me dramatically, right? To be able to get one step further where I was going, in my career. There's one time in particular I remember, with a buddy of mine, who's a fantastic illustrator, Ben Kaczynski. We were living in Kansas City. We were both kind of like emerging out of the music scene and trying to figure out what to do with our lives. And we were invited to a portfolio night, where a lot of the different agencies in the city, different creative directors, would come and give you feedback on your portfolio. And it was mostly a lot of these, new college grads, that were getting their portfolios reviewed, and we were kind of these like, grizzled music industry kids that were like, yeah, we spent all this time in vans while you guys were, getting your building up your design skills. And so we brought our books to this portfolio night, and I just remember I still have kind of the badge from that day. I remember it was like speed dating with creative directors, and they would just give you feedback on your work. And some of the it was some of it was tough love, which was great. But I just remember like walking away from those conversations getting like a little bit of a mix of like a boost of confidence in some ways, from some of the folks, like a little bit of, healthy humble pie, I think from some of the other feedback. But got called up for a freelance gig, just like a couple days or maybe a couple weeks after, and that was like the best validation I could have received, right? At getting asked to do freelance work for, you know I can't remember what it was at the time. Probably they did a lot of finance work, so it was probably like State Street Global Advisors, or one of those types of brands. Was probably my first project with that agency, and it was so validating to get a chance to work on something that I didn't at like a few weeks early didn't feel qualified to do, because I'm like, oh, all I know how to do is band merch. Now I'm getting a chance to work on something corporate, and that was just kind of like the first step, into that journey of realizing, okay, like as you start to see how the sausage is made, so to speak, in the industry, and you get to kind of, it's almost like, you know, discovering the Wizard of Oz, or seeing that the emperor has no clothes. It's like every step of the way, you just kind of are like, oh, okay, like this isn't as crazy as I thought it was, or this isn't as gate kept as I maybe thought it was, and okay, I am kind of qualified to do these things. And it really comes down, I think, to that mix of willingness, of yeah, some natural talent, but also just that hard work and desire to grow. And so if I can bring that to a next generation of design talent and just be able to say, hey, like you're heading on the right path, just like keep going and don't give up. I think that means the world to me.
No, it's super cool. It reminds me of that meme. You can just do things, right?
100%.
So if you could go back and give your younger designer self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Keep having fun. I think that's a big one. I've been, in design now for, gosh, 16, 17 years. And like I said, I remember at the beginning days, what a joy it was to just play around, and just do things for fun. And I think so many stumble into this quote unquote career because of that passion or that hobby of just realizing you could create. Like that's what uh, so many people fell in love with when it came to graphic design, and that's my story. But I think it's a tough industry. I think it can really beat you up over time, and whether that's tough clients, or tough roles, or all different kinds of things that can go kind of wrong. It's easy to get jaded and cynical, I think, in this space. And you start to lose your love for the work. And so I had a great mentor, at one point at Instacart, Elaine Fong. She was the former creative lead over at Blue Bottle, and the Eames Institute, and a couple different places. And she saw that in me at one point where I was actually like myself starting to show signs of, you know, losing my joy or like my passion for design. And she told me, you just got to like learn to have fun again. Like you got to get out there and just play. That's what she said. And that's even what helped me rediscover, I think, my love of design and just like my passion for the craft. I was just so much in the realm of doing that just that little bit of advice kind of put me back into this mindset of like, yeah, this is a really fun career to have. Like this is a really awesome thing to do, and we get to make things out of nothing, basically. So if I could go back and say, just like, don't lose that passion, don't keep having fun, and don't stop having fun.
And what about now? What's something you're learning or exploring right now that has gotten you excited that you're having fun with, creative or otherwise?
Yeah, this is going to be a funny one, because again, it's not, I think, super tactical to design, but something that I've found is a really interesting lens to like understand our industry and creative work. It's actually been food. Like I feel like the food industry is like super fascinating, has so many great parallels between what we do as creatives, and there's sort of like this storytelling, element that is, I think it's true of a lot of artistic mediums like, art, writing, and music. But I think for myself, like my personal and emotional connection with food has become this really helpful lens for interpreting like design and creativity. Like as a Taiwanese American, I've done a few talks in the past about how important food is to connecting with my cultural identity. But I just feel like there's so many great takeaways from, the world of food. So like for instance, when I think about the different modes we have to exist in as makers, like there's some really amazing lessons to take from, things like restaurants. The act of concepting is like developing a dish or a recipe, while execution and production mimic the mindset of a working kitchen, right? Even thinking about design as crafting a dish has been a helpful paradigm because it's forced me to think about the elements of design as ingredients. The same way that you pay attention to like the quality of your ingredients and the story behind it, like the origin, those different things. It's really helped me be more curious about like the history and the origin of things I use every day, like whether it's typography or photography or just these different components and ingredients of design that we use every day, and that ever evolving nature of design in the world around us. I think it's such like an exciting kind of different way to frame what we do every day that kind of creates this, um I don't know, it just kind of breaks you out of the norm a little bit, but that's been super fun for me, just kind of trying to like build these parallels between, maybe watching The Bear or something, and seeing kind of like these little like glimpses, or Chef's Table or something, into the restaurant industry, and food in general. I love like, watching food YouTube, or like little like food anthropology types of, snippets of where does food come from, or like what where there's like these YouTubes out there of guys like making dishes and stuff from the 1600s, or whatever it might be, and you see how things change. And I think it's just really interesting to see how in the creative industry we can learn so much from that same type of history and anthropology behind the work that we do to kind of improve our craft and our storytelling. So that's been something, I don't know, I love that stuff.
What were people eating in the 1600s? I just imagine it's a lot of stew.
Yeah, probably a lot of stew, some hardtack, probably some of those like biscuits that can keep when you're crossing the Atlantic Ocean so they won't mold and get bad.
A lot of I just think of like the massive turkey legs at Disneyland.
Love a massive turkey leg from Disneyland. That's a classic. That's a SoCal classic.
That and like a breakfast beer. I remember reading something a while ago about how like in old cities, like before running water, like London or elsewhere, like it was normal for people to like drink beer and like gin in the morning. So people were just getting pissed like all day long, like just getting hammered. And then maybe they'd offset that with coffee, but
But it was like a water safety issue too, right? Like that was part of it as well. Like they needed something.
yeah, yeah, the water wasn't clean enough to drink. Yeah, and the liquor.
But it's like you think about even that type of stuff, and like I maybe it's like I'm drawing too too far of a jump to design, but you think about how much utility and necessity and stuff like that, like drive expression and design, art, culture, all of those things. Like it's whether you're eating stuff or you're making stuff and seeing stuff, it's like the same thing. Like there's elements of that that like makes it like I'm really curious, right? About like we talked about AI a little bit before we jumped on the podcast, and it's like, what does visual expression look like and like the quality of it when you suddenly have access to create like a lot of someone referred to it as like drivel, I think, or like slop, like AI slop. Like, okay, so if AI slop can be produced at the click of a button, what will that do to the actual craft of design in the future? And who are the people and the companies and the brands that will evolve what visual expression looks like, in this next era? It's a pretty exciting time. Like everything is a response to something else, right? So I have no real take on what that's going to be, but I'm just super curious to see what emerges, because as much as I think there's like a bit of a doomsday, you know, element to what we're all kind of experiencing with IP rights and you know all those different types of things. Um, it'll be super interesting to see how that influences art, culture, and design, in the future.
It's going to be gnarly when it's happening inside people's minds, though. Like, if influencing your actual speech. It's like, I don't know. I don't know if I'll take the chip.
Yeah, I think Black Mirror is definitely like slowly becoming more of a documentary, like a docudrama more than anything else.
For some people, it's just startup ideas, right? They're like, oh, I'm gonna make that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think about this a lot, like what's going to happen and how is the AI, how is the proliferation of AI, Gen AI tools in creative, how is it going to change things? Like, I think in a lot of ways, there's going to be like sort of a two-tier system, where it's like we're going to have the brands that people create as craftspeople, and they're going to create these beautiful brand identities and systems, and then they're going to actually build a brand through content, and it's going to be in a lot of ways similar to how we've done things over the last 150 years, even before digital. And then there's going to be companies that think they can get away with doing things by over leveraging these tools. And I think that in the former category, there will be people using AI, but they'll be using AI like very strategically and very sparingly, and when it makes sense, especially when it comes to like task management and things that can save time. But they will, I think, understand what are things that AI needs to do versus things that I need to do as a craftsperson. And I think that the people that kind of fit into that latter camp, that over leverage these AI tools, I think there's going to be some delusion at play where they think they can kind of just outsource the whole of the brand building effort to these tools. And I think people are gonna, it might not be this thing where like everyone like has a very explicit designation where it's like, oh, that's an AI brand, that's a human brand. But I think people are just going to know. I think people are going to be drawn towards the more human reliant brands. That's my take on it. I don't know. I mean, it's still kind of new.
Well, I mean, I think one way I'd like characterize that a little bit is kind of like, so my early hypothesis is that like I think every creative and designer, or like anyone in the creative field, is a little bit freaked out by AI because of how much it makes certain things easier, I guess, that like, or more accessible in some ways. And right now everyone's, I think like the primary comment is like, well, it's still like 80% or like 90% of the way there, but it's at that last 10% that still feels a little off. I feel like that gap's going to close before we know it. Like, if anything, it's going to be, just so if that becomes like the last moat, I don't think that's the last moat. What I really think the renaissance that we're in, if we can call it a renaissance, is it's going to give power to those that understand taste or have taste, that and going back to what I was saying about that gift of interpretation, like you have to be able to understand as like I think we're going to move a little bit from like the era of the creator to the era of the curator, and the power of the curator, the one that understands like if you have access to boundless tools of creation, to anything in the universe, right, at your fingertips, whether it's video clips or anything you can think of, you can now make. The world is going to be filled with way too much stuff, the same way that in the information era there's a web page for everything, right? Like it's impossible to pick. So then the ability to index those things became a business in and of itself, right? Like we think about all of our favorite blogs or places to get inspiration from. Like you need something to now organize that information in a way that you can actually digest and experience, because it's impossible to go to Google Images and as an example and find what you need to get inspiration. That's why inspiration sites exist. Just as one example. So I think the power of the curator is a really, really interesting concept here, and something I've been talking to a lot of designers about that have focused a lot of their personal brand or their gift on being like the craftsman, like high craftsman, like really technically gifted, or being able to engage in that skill, whether that's illustration or like other things. I'm encouraging a lot of these folks to be thoughtful about what they're investing into, or how they're interpreting the world, perceiving things, and growing as brand curators and like taste. Because I feel like you'll when you can kind of become that librarian of creativity, like what if you could tell that story that you always wanted to tell that you never could. I thought about that a lot. I was watching the Lucasfilm document, or sorry, the was it Lucas? Yeah, the ILM documentaries, and how George Lucas, in when he was making the first Star Wars film, like did have vision for what he wanted to make, and this grand, space opera. Technology just wasn't there, right? Like visual effects wasn't there. He had to invent some of these techniques, and CGI wasn't a thing. And so I feel like when we think about how technology is evolving, whether it's AI or anything else, like it becomes a better tool to tell stories. You still need to be a great storyteller, and you need to be able to know what is a good story and not. And that's not a skill everyone has, right? Like AI doesn't have that skill. I don't think it ever will. It'll still need the curator.
So looking ahead, I know we were just talking about the future a bit, and it's definitely an exciting time to be a creative working in our space. But when you think about the future and yourself, like what kind of creative legacy do you hope to build at Hive and beyond with your creative work?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I described as my mission: succeeding by helping others succeed. I obviously want to contribute to this brand and the business thriving. I want to leave wherever I am better than it was when I showed up. But the most important aspect of that for me is with people as much as the work, right? Whether big or small, I want to make a positive impact on my colleagues, direct reports, the leaders, and build an amazing culture. Like that's really what I care about. The greatest and most impactful moments of my career aren't the projects that were the most exciting, but it was those times where there was a true human impact that helped me become a better person. I really think that's the type of legacy I want to leave behind. I want to make a great place for people to work and be their best selves, whether that's in marketing, creative, and whatever space there are. Like if we can make that a net positive for everybody, that's the legacy I want to leave behind.
Yeah. Yeah. So finally, what's a story or project you've been a part of that reminds you why you do all of this work in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm going to keep the theme going of being a designer, not talking about design, but I always come back to this story. And I remember early in my career, I worked a lot on new business at the agency VML. Back then, like my mandate was, helping design the RFP responses that would, go out to uh, different prospects and different pitches. Some of these RFP responses are like hundreds of pages long. I'd spend hours pasting copy into these massive InDesign files. And then, our proofreaders would print them out, mark them up, redline everything, hand them back to me. And I'd have like a stack of like, 300 pages. And like one by one, I'd be leafing through these pages and like typing in updates into InDesign one at a time. It took forever. And a lot of these were, as you can imagine, like super tight deadlines, 24-hour turnarounds, this type of thing. And I remember one particular day, I was probably the last person or one of the last people in the office. It was probably around like 8 p.m. I was working away on these proofing edits, and one of our C-suite leaders, executives, was about to leave the office, and he was like kind of walking by me. I was sitting in the bullpen, just like working away on my laptop. Um, when he saw me sitting there still working on these proofing edits, he stopped just to be like, "Hey, like, why aren't you heading home?" and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, "Oh, I'm just trying to get these edits done, and I'll head home soon." And he actually stopped, like, put his stuff down, and like sat next to me. And I'm like, a junior art director at this point, right? And this is like one of our C-suite executives. And he's like, what can I do to help? And I'm like, not a whole lot, like I've got a stack of 300 pages here that I've got to like type in individually into InDesign. I don't think there's anything you can really do here. This was before, we had Figma and could collaborate at the same time. And he just sat there with me for, an hour or two and just like kept me company, talked to me, and just like literally held the stack of papers for me and just like handed it to me one at a time while I was working through proofing edits. And that made such a huge impact on me. I'm sure that individual probably has, doesn't remember this story at all, but just that hour or two that he spent there as like a key leader of the business, sitting there with a junior art director, just making stupid proofing edits, was just like so powerfully impacting to me. And we had this value or principle at VML that said, never say it's not my job. And that was an example to me of someone that like practiced what they preached, right? They espoused this philosophy of saying like, hey, we'll all get our hands dirty and help each other out. And this guy actually did, right? Like he sat there with me and held my papers. And I think for me, it really made an impression on me, and that's something that I to this day like still carry and want to reflect, because like, yeah, sure, it'd be nice to win a Cannes Lion and whatever, or a a Clio, or whatever our new like advertising award might be. But it's like tough to be a good person. You know what I mean? Out there, and to actually like, especially as you kind of grow in your career or you end up in these different spaces, like it's like I said, it's easy to be, cynical or jaded. I aspire to be that type of a leader, to have that like kindness and humility, and that desire to not to lose that essence of just what it means to be a decent human being. So that really made an impact on me. And so like when I think of something that I still carry with me to this day, that's the one that stands out.
Oh, that's so cool. It's almost like you're saying people matter.
Yeah, 100%.
That's awesome. I love stories like that. Andrew, I wish we could keep chatting, but we're unfortunately at time. For people that want to learn more about you and find you online, where's the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, my handle is Andrew X Chen on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. I am not the Andrew Chen that wrote the Cold Start Problem, or the Andrew Chen that owns 316 Denim. Um, I'm Andrew X Chen online, and you can also find me at andrewchen.design on my website.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cool. Thanks, guys.